I'm sorry, the Jazz are projected to win 26 and a half games next season. No chance, not a chance in hell are they flirting with nearly 30 wins next season. Lock it in, that's an under. And sure, there are some holdovers from the playoff versions of this team, but the dominoes have already begun to fall there with Bojan Bogdanovic on his way to Detroit in exchange for Kelly Olynyk. I have to imagine that Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley are not far behind. And this is pretty much exactly what I suggested the Jazz do after they were eliminated from the playoffs. It was clear they weren't going anywhere with that Gobert Mitchell core. And with Donovan Mitchell already unhappy, it was good for them to get out ahead of that potential issue and capitalize on his value. Then on the flip side, you weren't going to be able to field a competitive team retooling around Rudy Gobert on the fly. And at his age, really no reason to keep him around for a rebuild. And this should really come as no surprise with Danny Ainge taking over as GM. He's never been afraid to hit the reset button on a franchise. In terms of the trade haul, they got a king's ransom for Rudy Gobert. I think far more than anyone would have expected in return for him. In exchange for Rudy Gobert, they walk away with firsts in 2023, 25, 27, and 29 with a swap in 26. Then Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, Walker Kessler, the rookie big man from Auburn, Leandro Balmero, and Patrick Beverly, who was eventually flipped for Taylor Horton Tucker and Stanley Johnson. Then the Jazz later traded Donovan Mitchell for Colin Sexton, Lowry Markkinen, rookie O'Shea Abaji out of Kansas, and then first round picks in 25, 27, and 29 with swaps in between all of those years. And for the Jazz, the real treasure here is just the absolute spoil of riches they now have in terms of draft capital, basically overnight. And if you're a Jazz fan, even though Minnesota and more so Cleveland should be really good here moving forward, it still has to feel really good to look at those draft picks and see that you have Cavalier and Timberwolves draft picks, two of the most historically inept franchises that we have in the league. The players are sort of whatever. I suspect that most and maybe even all of the players that they got back in this trade won't be a part of the next Jazz playoff run. But I still wouldn't say that they got nothing back in those deals. I mentioned Colin Sexton. I really feel like he's become underrated in this league. And sure, he's one of those guards who isn't quite good enough of a playmaker to be a point guard and isn't big enough to be a shooting guard, but he's still only going to be 24 next season. He's a career 20 a game scorer. So that's not nothing. He could be something for the future on this team. Maybe he's a future trade asset. Or, hey, at the very least, he's going to keep this team looking somewhat respectable and keep asses in seats as they rebuild. O'Shea Abaji, I mentioned. And while I wasn't overly impressed with him as an NBA prospect during his time at Kansas, again, it's not nothing. He was the 14th pick in the draft, and he's going to have plenty of playing time here in Utah with really no pressure to perform. So maybe he can develop into something under those circumstances. Also, as much of a meme as Taylor Horton Tucker has become, we have seen time and time again these small forwards have a bit of a renaissance once they get out from under LeBron's wing. We saw it with Brandon Ingram, and we saw it last season with Kyle Kuzma. So even though I've seen basically no indication that Taylor Horton Tucker is even a decent player, maybe it turns around here in Utah. And if it doesn't work out, he's only under contract for this year and maybe next year if he accepts his player option, neither of which will the Jazz be good. So there's really no risk for them. The rest of those guys, Malik Beasley, Kelly Olynyk, Markkinen, Vanderbilt, they're all solid players, sure, but likely have no long-term future with the team. I would expect them to be just kind of flip for more picks here later down the line. So if you're a Utah Jazz fan and you were looking to invest in a jersey, maybe hold off for now because I suspect there's going to be some pretty crazy turnover throughout the next few years.